In 1955, the death of Emmett Till was just one more reason for Medgar Evers to continue his work as a civil rights activist. He was the NAACP's first field representative in Mississippi. Having grown up in the Jim Crow South, Medgar was a man on a mission.
There were any number of things in his childhood that really made him acutely aware of the injustices. As a young man who volunteered to go into the army to fight for his country in World War II, and then come home and find that he was still a second-class citizen, not being able to register and vote, he said, this has to change. And he decided that he would be a part of that change.
Evers fought for change in the racially charged climate of Mississippi.
Mississippi was considered the South Africa of America. It was like the most oppressive state, the most anger and fear and hatred and violence. And so his courage in the context of that state took on bigger than life meaning.
Medgar Evers, like so many black people whose families before them were raised in the South, actually loved the South. And they had this tremendous hope that things would change.
But as Medgar worked on the front lines of change, he placed his life in jeopardy.
Just working for civil rights in Mississippi, there's a strike against you. You're a marked person. He knew that.
Medgar and his family lived with death threats. It was a life of barricaded doors and ever-drawn window blinds and safety drills for the children. Despite the dangers, in early 1963, Evers began an active campaign to force the issue of racial inequality in Jackson, Mississippi. He organized demonstrations, went head-to-head with the mayor and the city's business leaders.
We were determined under Medgar's leadership to forge ahead, to crack the system. And they were determined to wipe him out because he was a leader.
On May 28, 1963, the NAACP began sit-ins at Woolworth's, where blacks were not served at the lunch counter. That night, someone threw a Molotov cocktail at Evers' home. Damage was minimal, but the message was clear. Prophetically, at an NAACP gathering in Jackson on June 7th, Evers told the crowd, "I love my children and I love my wife, and I would die and die gladly if that would make a better life for them." On the night of June 12th, here in what was then the NAACP office, Evers watched with other movement leaders as President John F. Kennedy delivered an impassioned speech on civil rights.
We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind.
Medgar was thrilled with the speech and then met with his NAACP colleagues late into the evening. When their meeting was over, he drove home. In a nearby vacant wooded lot, a sniper crouched behind some honeysuckle. Medgar's car turned into his driveway. As Medgar stepped out of his car, Medgar and Murley's worst fears had come true. His death was not considered a lynching, but an assassination.
It was a real sign of changes to come that his body came all the way to Washington and his widow and little children went to the White House and that he was buried in Arlington Cemetery and accepted as somebody, as a martyr.
He must be looked upon as one who helped liberate and free the state of Mississippi, the South, and the nation. You know, he had many opportunities to leave, to do something else, but he decided to stay. And he paid a heavy price. He gave his life.
Medgar Evers' death served as a rallying cry for the movement. 2 months later, on August 28, 1963, a crowd of 250,000 gathered for a historic march in Washington. It was the largest demonstration for human rights that America had ever seen. Black and white, Jew, Protestant, and Catholic had come together with the hope that equality, liberty, and justice would prevail for everyone. In 1964, as summer drew near, people in the civil rights movement dubbed it Freedom Summer and laid out an ambitious agenda. College students up north were being recruited to travel to the South and work for the movement. The main destination was Mississippi, where only a tiny fraction of all blacks were registered to vote. The primary goal was to sign them up. The secondary goal was to avoid getting killed.
The Klan in Mississippi were so deep-seated in violence and intimidation and harassment of blacks to keep them from voting that they would do anything possible to continue the way of life. And when they found out that they could not, they did have to resort to murder.
They saw us as outsiders. They saw us as troublemakers. They saw us as agitators.
The movement was looking for new volunteers. When a civil rights recruiter came to New York City's Queens College in June 1964, the purpose of the mission he described struck a chord in Andrew Goodman, age 20. Andy had been raised in a Jewish home where ethics and social activism held great importance.
Andy heard what was happening down there and how black people were not able to vote, and he came home and he told me about it. And he said that he wants more than anything else to go down there.
Andy joined other recruits in Oxford, Ohio, where they were trained on how to help register black voters and what to expect from the South segregationists. James Foreman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee warned the students, "I may be killed, you may be killed." Andy would soon meet up with Michael Schwerner, another activist from a similar background. Schwerner was a college-educated Jewish man from New York. 6 months earlier, Mickey and his wife Rita had come to Meridian, Mississippi. In 1964, this building housed the local chapter of CORE, the Congress for Racial Equality. Rita and Mickey began working here with CORE worker James Chaney. He was a passionate young man who'd grown up under the sting of segregation and racism and felt compelled to act on his beliefs.
James Chaney lived in Meridian. He had lived there pretty much all his life. He was very committed to the civil rights movement. He was a very straightforward, honest person, and he and Mickey worked very closely. When James Chaney became a full-time CORE worker, he and Mickey started making plans to contact various churches and various groups about participation, primarily in voter registration activities.
This flew in the face of white supremacists. Keeping blacks from voting was key to maintaining white power. The Ku Klux Klan targeted Mickey Schwerner. Sunday, June 21st, 1964. It was just one day after Andrew Goodman had joined up with Mickey Schwerner and James Chaney.
Mickey and James heard that the Mount Zion Church had been burned and several people had been quite badly beaten.
The trio drove to the church in Philadelphia, Mississippi, to assess the damage and provide emotional support to the congregation. But they soon ran into trouble. After the men left the church, they were stopped by Deputy Sheriff Cecil Price, who escorted them to the Neshoba County Jail. They were held on a variety of trumped-up charges and were not allowed to make a telephone call. At around 10 p.m., without explanation, Deputy Sheriff Price told them they were free to leave the jail. The three young men didn't drive far before they were once again stopped by Deputy Sheriff Cecil Price. This time, he delivered them into the hands of the Ku Klux Klan. The three men were driven down an old logging road to a remote location where the car stopped. They were ordered out and each shot. But the Klan had miscalculated. The disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers created an indelible story of black and white brothers fighting for a noble cause. Instead of turning away in fear, America aimed a laser-like focus on the South.
That was part of the whole point of Freedom Summer. They decided that if they brought the sons and daughters of America's white elite down there, the country would pay attention. And boy, were they right, because as soon as this mixed trio disappeared, it became a huge national event.
The day after the workers were reported missing, the FBI, acting on a tip, discovered Mickey Schwerner's 63 Ford Fairlane station wagon in a thicket about 80 feet off the highway. As J. Edgar Hoover updated President Johnson over the phone, the car, which had been torched, was still smoldering.
Prior to what's happened, these men have been killed. Although I can't tell whether anybody's in there in view of the intense heat. Well, now what would make you think they've been killed? Because of the fact that it is the same car that they were in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
As it turned out, there were no bodies in the car, but the grisly discovery was nonetheless bad news to friends and family.
Cars don't get burned and buried in swamps with the inhabitants of them last known to have been held by Mississippi sheriffs and have a happy ending.
Hoover suggested to Johnson that U.S. Marshals be sent to Mississippi, but the president wanted FBI. You get your men in there now, he ordered. Hoover had no choice but to comply. The FBI director sent 150 FBI agents, despite his own personal animosity toward the movement. Johnson also sent Navy divers to hunt for the 3 men. Meanwhile, in Washington, the uproar over the 3 missing civil rights workers ignited the political process. Within a week after their disappearance, the national attention it attracted helped convince Congress to get behind Johnson's 1964 Civil Rights Bill. With Southern legislators no longer able to stem the tide of change, the bill was passed and Johnson signed it into law on July 2nd, 1964. As history was being made, Martin Luther King was at his side. With the new law in place, the FBI began infiltrating the Klan with a controversial policy of recruiting a network of paid Klan informants. Hoover felt it was a necessary evil. In early August, the policy paid off. An informant who'd reportedly been paid $30,000 told the FBI where to look. The bodies of Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Mickey Schwerner were found buried beneath an earthen dam. Goodman, Chaney, and Schwerner were perceived as martyrs. The story of their death had a ripple effect in nearly every segment of American society.
They gave their life, they gave some blood to help redeem the very soul of America.
It lit a fire on the college students around America to go on into the South, take the risk, help blacks register to vote, and move America forward in this whole struggle for justice.
But Mississippi was digging in its heels, despite the fact that FBI agents learned from Klan informants the identities of 18 men believed to be involved in the murders. Not one of the suspects was brought up on murder charges. Finally, the U.S. Justice Department stepped in. On October 20th, 1967, 7 Klansmen, including Imperial Wizard Sam Bowers and Deputy Price, were found guilty of federal civil rights violations in the deaths of the 3 men. Their sentences ranged from 3 to 10 years. But was it justice?
I don't think there was justice because civil rights were violated, yes, but 3 men were murdered, and they were not tried for murder.
But the 3 civil rights workers did not die in vain. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the movement had gained incredible momentum. The movement would continue to struggle for voting rights. The war was to be waged in Alabama. Casualties would include a young black activist, and a white Christian minister.
And one of them carried this club and swung it and hit Jim on the side of the head here.
White or black, the threat of death was very real.